She stood in the freezing cold, holding the reins of a dying wagon, with 3 starving children huddled behind her. Her lips were cracked. Her hands were bleeding. And somewhere behind her, a dangerous man was hunting them down. When she saw the cabin on the mountain, she had one choice: knock on a stranger's door and beg for shelter, or let her children freeze to death in the snow. But the man who answered that door, he wasn't looking for a family. He came to this mountain to disappear, to be alone, to forget. What happens when a woman running from her past collides with a man hiding from his? And when the monster from her old life finally tracks her down, will this stranger risk everything to protect a family that isn't even his? This story proves that family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up when you're at your lowest. If you believe that real strength means protecting those who can't protect themselves, hit that subscribe button and stay with me until the end. Drop a comment telling me, have you ever met someone who changed your life when you needed it most? The wind here in Hollow Ridge has teeth. Ethan felt that bite as he stood on his porch, watching the last bit of light bleed out of the sky. Solitude was not just a choice for him. It was a shield. He had only put up that notice for a cook weeks ago, right after he had turned another dinner into a black mess. Old Samuel Briggs down at the trading post had warned him. "You sure about this, Cole? Inviting strangers all the way up this mountain?" Ethan had just grunted. "I just need someone who will not burn water." Samuel polished his glasses and said, "Well, son, sometimes you go fishing for a catfish and you end up hooking a whole alligator." Now, standing in the cold, Ethan figured nobody was coming. Winter was settling in for good. Then he heard it, the groan of wagon wheels on frozen dirt. His hand went right to his rifle. Late visitors usually meant bad news. The wagon that crawled out of the pine trees looked like it was held together with sheer grit. One wheel had a death wobble, and the canvas top was more patches than fabric. The mule pulling it looked like it had given up on ever resting again. The woman holding the reins looked like she had seen too much of the world's rough side. But it was the 3 little ones huddled in the back that really got to him. 2 girls and a boy wrapped in blankets so thin you could probably read a newspaper through them. They just stared, their eyes big and old. She pulled up short of the porch. For a long moment, they just sized each other up. "Are you Ethan Cole?" she asked. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. "I am. You are the one looking for a cook." "That is me," he said. "I did not figure anyone would be brave enough to come up here this late." She almost smiled. Desperation can make you brave. "Do you still need somebody?" she asked. Ethan's eyes went back to the children. The little boy's lips were turning a shade of blue. "I needed a cook," he said slowly. "I was not planning on a whole family." He saw the light in her eyes dim just a bit. She picked up the reins. "We will be on our way then." "Hold on," Ethan said, stepping off the porch. "I did not say no. I just said I was not expecting it." He walked a little closer. "What is your name?" "Martha Hale." She paused for a second. "These are my children. Sarah is 9, Clara is 6, and Thomas is 4. They are good kids. They will not cause you any trouble." Ethan could see her pride. It was a thin coat against the cold, but it was all she had left. "Can you cook?" he asked her. "Yes." "And you will not set the place on fire?" For the first time, a little bit of a smile touched her lips. "I can promise you that." Ethan looked back at his house. It was a big, empty place his grandfather had built. It was far too much room for just one man. "All right," he said, surprising himself. "There is a small room off the kitchen. It is warm. You and the kids can have it for now." She just looked at him, completely stunned. "You would let us inside your house?" "Well, I am not going to put children in a barn in November," he said. He was already walking toward her tired mule. "Get your family inside before they turn to ice. I will take care of the animal." As he settled the mule in the barn, Ethan asked himself what in the world he had just done. He came to Hollow Ridge to be alone, to get away from people and all their problems. Now his house was full of them. He remembered old Samuel's words about hooking an alligator. When he got back to the kitchen, it was already warmer. Martha had the fire going strong. The little boy, Thomas, was pressed against her side, not crying, just soaking up the heat. The two girls stood by the door, holding hands, looking like little ghosts. They were all skinny, the kind of skinny that comes from too many hungry nights. "The room is right through there," Ethan said, pointing. "It is not fancy, but it is warm." He had a feeling his quiet winter was officially over. Some folks see a family freezing in a barn and just bolt the door. But Ethan Cole wasn't that kind of man. This story is about what happens when a good man opens his home, proving that a little warmth can save a life. It reminds us that we all have the power to help, so stick with me to see how it all turns out. Martha said, "Thank you, Mr. Cole." Ethan shook his head. "Call me Ethan. If you're fixin' to cook my meals, we can drop the formalities." He went to the cupboard and pulled out what little he had ready: some bread, dried deer meat, and a jar of preserves. He set the food on the table, saying, "It's late for a big supper, but this ought to hold y'all till morning." Martha guided her children to the chairs. She broke the bread and divided the meat with a careful hand, like someone who knew how to make a little go a long way. Ethan watched from the stove. The kitchen, usually so quiet, was now filled with the soft sounds of a family. He wondered when they had last eaten a real meal. Martha answered without looking up. "Yesterday morning. We ran out of money." When Ethan brought out more food, her hand shot out and grabbed his wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "We don't take handouts. We can't pay you back." He met her dark, direct eyes. "It's not a handout. You agreed to work. Just consider this an advance payment." Her hand stayed for a second more, then she let go and nodded, all businesslike. Ethan left them to their meal and went to check on the small room off the kitchen. It was tiny, not much bigger than a horse stall with a narrow bed against the wall. But the stovepipe ran right through it, keeping it warm. He had used it for storage, but he quickly cleared the boxes out to the barn. He found clean blankets upstairs that smelled like cedar. It wasn't much, but it was warm, dry, and safe. That was more than Martha and her children had known in a long time. When he got back to the kitchen, the children were done eating. They were leaning against each other like a pile of tired puppies. Martha was already at the sink washing dishes, looking dead on her feet. "Leave those," Ethan said quietly. "Get your people settled for the night. You can start earning your keep in the morning." Martha paused, then nodded. She dried her hands and gathered her children with a few soft words. They filed past him toward the little room. The oldest girl, Sarah, stopped right in front of him. She looked up with her mother's serious eyes. "Thank you for the supper, Mr. Cole." Her voice was small but clear. "You're welcome, Sarah." The girl's eyes widened, surprised he remembered her name. Then she hurried after the others. Martha was the last one. She paused in the doorway. "Mr. Cole, Ethan, I know you took a chance on us. I promise I won't make you regret it." He kept his voice a bit gruff, not comfortable with all the thanks. "See that you don't. Breakfast is at dawn." She started to close the door, then stopped. "Why did you help us?" Ethan thought about the cold he saw in those kids' eyes. He thought about the pride in Martha's shoulders and the heavy loneliness of his own quiet house. "Because I know what it's like to need a hand," he said, "and no child should sleep in a barn when there's a warm bed nearby." Martha just looked at him for a long moment. Then she gave a small nod and softly closed the door. Ethan stood alone in the kitchen, listening to the quiet sounds of a family settling in. For the first time in 3 years, the house held more than just his own heartbeat. And that felt like a strange kind of comfort. The wind howled outside, but inside 5 people slept warm. Winter had truly arrived. But this year, Ethan Cole wouldn't face it alone. Morning came gray and cold. Ethan woke up to the smell of fresh coffee. For a second, he thought he'd dreamed it all. Then he heard the quiet sounds of someone moving around downstairs. He dressed quickly and went down. The kitchen already felt different. It felt lived in. The stove was hot and coffee was steaming in the pot. Martha stood at the counter slicing bread. She looked up when he came in, her face cautious. "Good morning. I hope I didn't wake you." "No," Ethan said, moving toward the stove's warmth. "Coffee smells good." "There's bacon and eggs if you want them," she said. "I took a look in your pantry to see what you had. I need to know what's on hand to plan meals." She sounded defensive, like she expected him to be angry. Ethan poured a cup of coffee. It was strong and hot. "The kitchen is yours to manage now," he told her. "Pantry and root cellar, too. Just tell me when supplies get low." "The children are still asleep," Martha said, turning the bacon. "They were worn out. I figured I'd let them rest." Ethan saw a different kind of cold in her eyes, a chill that had nothing to do with the Wyoming wind. He could tell her children had been hungry for so long it was all they knew. In the morning light, she was worn but not broken, her faded blue dress as clean as a pin. He had to ask, "You mentioned you're a widow." Her hand stopped for just a second. "Yes, my husband passed 4 months ago. An accident." When Ethan offered his sympathies, she just shook her head. "No need." Her words were flat, like she was talking about yesterday's weather. "They came from Ohio, running from debts after he died." "My aunt in Montana said there was work," she explained, her movements just a little too deliberate. "But our wagon gave out, and the boy took sick. We got stuck." That is when she saw his notice in town. She cracked 3 eggs into the pan, more than he ever made for himself. Ethan watched her work, seeing the careful way she made a little go a long way. "I can pay $10 a month," he finally said, "plus a warm roof and food for y'all. Good cooking is worth a fair wage." A small smile, the first he had seen, touched her lips. "I accept your terms." As he was heading for the door, her quiet voice stopped him. "Mr. Cole, if anyone comes looking for us, if they ask questions, will you tell them we are here?" The fear she tried so hard to hide was now plain as day. "Are you expecting trouble?" he asked gently. "I do not know," she said, and he knew it was the god's honest truth. He pulled on his coat, his voice steady. "Far as anyone needs to know, I hired a widow named Martha Hale. That is nobody's business but ours." He saw the tension leave her shoulders. "Do not thank me yet," he said with a hint of a grin. "It is a long winter." While mucking out the stalls, the barn door creaked open. It was Sarah, the oldest girl, looking like a small, serious shadow in a coat too thin for the cold. "Mama sent me to ask if you need anything." Ethan leaned on his pitchfork. She had her mother's watchful eyes, far too old for a 9-year-old girl. "Your mama says you have to earn your keep?" He let out a slow breath. "Your only job is to be 9, but if you want, you can help me gather the eggs." For the first time, her face lit up. "I am good at that." Then the light dimmed. "I used to do it before." They gathered eggs from the hen house in a comfortable quiet. "Mr. Cole?" Her small voice piped up. "Can we really stay all winter, even though we are extra trouble?" He stopped and looked at this little girl who felt like a burden on the world. "You are not trouble, Sarah. You are folks who needed a hand, that is all." She thought that over, then gave a solemn nod. As she started for the house, she turned back. "At our old house, my father, he used to get real angry about little things, a broken dish or crying." She took a shaky breath. "Will you get angry like that?" The question hit him harder than a physical blow. He knelt down to her level, looking her straight in the eye. "Sarah, listen to me. I do not get angry over broken plates or children making noise. This is a working ranch. Things break. All that matters is that y'all are safe and warm. You understand?" She studied his face for a long moment, deciding if he could be trusted. Then she slowly nodded and headed for the house. At noon, the smell of good cooking filled his kitchen. The children sat at the table eating a thick soup, quiet but not afraid. It was more than just a meal. It was a beginning. It's a terrible feeling to be sick and helpless, worried that the one person who gave you shelter might just throw you out in the cold. That's where Martha was, and her fear was as real as the fever burning her up. For a man who'd been alone for 3 years, the last week had been a strange comfort. This widow and her 3 kids, brought in by a blizzard, had filled his quiet house with a warmth that had nothing to do with the stove. They ate their meals together, a makeshift family finding its rhythm while the winter howled outside. He'd almost gotten used to it. After supper each night, Martha would put the children to bed, her soft voice a murmur through the walls. Ethan would sit by the fire, hearing the simple sounds of a home coming back to life. He'd watch her finish the chores, a quiet understanding growing between them. She was worried he'd send them away once the storm broke. He assured her he wasn't in the habit of throwing folks out into a blizzard. Some men would have, she'd said, not even letting them in to begin with. He didn't know what to say to that, so he just promised to get supplies from town. They were even, she'd said. But on the 8th morning, the house was dead silent. That was wrong. There was no smell of coffee, no fire crackling in the stove, just a cold, heavy quiet. He went to Martha's door and knocked gently. He found her looking awful, flushed with fever and swaying on her feet. She looked right through him. Her worry wasn't for herself, but for her children. What if this man, this stranger, decided a sick woman and her kids were too much trouble? The thought was plain on her face. She tried to push past him, insisting she could work. Ethan caught her arm, his voice firm but gentle. "You need to get back in that bed." He could feel the heat coming off her skin. Her teeth were chattering. He guided her back to the bed where her 3 small children were huddled together, watching with wide, scared eyes. Martha tried to argue, her voice cracking. "Please, I can work. I just need a moment." He cut through the feverish panic. "Martha, get back in bed. That is not a request." Her shoulders slumped in defeat. "I cannot be sick," she whispered, the words hitting Ethan hard. "You will send us away." He knelt down to look her square in the eye. "I am not sending anyone away over a fever. You rest and get better. We will manage just fine." He tried to make a little joke, telling her it was part of her employment to listen to him, and her eyes finally drifted closed. He then turned to Sarah, the oldest. "Your mom is sick. You 3 are going to help me today. Can you do that?" The little girl gave a solemn nod. In the kitchen, as Ethan got the fire going again, little Clara's voice piped up, small and trembling. "Is Mama going to die?" "No," Ethan said with more certainty than he felt. "She just has a fever." "Our papa got sick," Thomas mumbled from behind his thumb. "Then he died." The words hung in the air. Ethan stopped and faced them. "I am sorry about your papa, but your mama has a different kind of sick. I promise your mama's going to be just fine." He saw some of the fear leave their faces. "All right," he said, turning back to the stove. "Who knows how to make coffee?" The boy gave a solemn nod and found a spot on the floor by the stove, soaking up the heat. Ethan and the children got to work. It wasn't as smooth as when Martha did it, but they managed. Sarah carefully measured out the coffee grounds. Clara, moving slow but sure, set the table with plates and cups. Ethan cooked bacon without burning it to a crisp, but the eggs were a different story. They were edible, but that was about all you could say for them. They ate quietly, the kids still weighed down with worry for their mother. Ethan watched them, noticing a little scar on Clara's chin and how Thomas's boot was worn clean through at the toe. "After we eat," he said, pushing his plate back. "Sarah, you check on your mama every hour. You make sure her breathing is steady and the fever isn't climbing. If anything changes, you come find me right away. You understand?" "Yes, sir." "Clara, you're with me in the barn. Thomas, you stay inside where it's warm." The boy just nodded. Their morning found a strange new rhythm. As he worked, Ethan kept an ear turned toward the house, listening for any sound of trouble. Clara was a good helper, quiet and steady. "Mr. Cole?" she asked, scattering feed to the chickens, her breath making clouds in the cold air. "When Mama gets better, are we going to have to leave?" "Now, why would you think that?" he asked. "Because we're trouble," she said. Simple as stating the sky is blue. Papa always said we were more trouble than we were worth. Ethan stopped his work and turned to face her. Clara, you look at me. Her small face was heavy with sadness. Your papa was dead wrong. Y'all are not trouble. He knelt down to her level. You're children, and children need looking after, with food and a warm place to sleep. That's not trouble. That's just how it is. Your mama works hard for you, and that makes y'all a family worth having around. Tears welled up in Clara's eyes, but she fought them back. Mama says we're not supposed to cry. Well, your mama's wrong about that too, Ethan said gently. Crying is just feelings spilling out. Ain't nothing wrong with it. A single tear slid down her cheek. Slid down. I'm scared Mama's gonna die. She's not going to, he said, handing her his handkerchief. I know you're scared, but your mom is tough. She's going to be just fine, I promise you. Clara clutched the cloth in her small hand. Can I keep this? Just till she's better. You keep it as long as you need. They finished their chores in a silence that felt a little lighter than before. Back at the house, Sarah reported that Martha was still sleeping, her breathing even, but the fever holding on. Ethan tried his hand at making soup. It was food, but it wouldn't win any prizes. The children ate it without a word of complaint, though their shared glances told him they were just being polite. It's not as good as Mama's, Thomas said with the blunt honesty only a child can have. Thomas, Sarah whispered sharply. It's all right, Ethan said with a small smile. The boy's right. Your mama is a far better cook than I am. Later, while the children played quietly, Ethan slipped into Martha's room. She was fast asleep, her face flushed with fever. He felt her forehead, hot, but not worryingly so. Even exhausted, he could see the lines of strain on her face. Whatever drove her to his doorstep had taken a heavy toll. He noticed the trunk in the corner, the one thing that was theirs. It wasn't locked. Inside, he saw what he expected, mended clothes for the children, a woman's things, and at the very bottom, a bundle of letters wrapped in cloth. Ethan didn't read the letters, but he saw the postmark was from an aunt in Montana. He closed the trunk, feeling like he'd crossed a line, and quietly left. The day dragged on. He tried to keep to his routine, but his mind was always on the house. Each hour, Sarah gave him the same update. Still sleeping, still feverish. That evening, he came in to find the children huddled by Martha's door, whispering. Sarah looked up at him, her face pale. She's awake, but she's not making sense. She says someone's coming and we have to hide. Ethan went into the room. Martha was sitting bolt upright, her eyes wide and wild. They'll find us, she said, her voice thin and desperate. We should have kept going. He'll send someone. Martha, Ethan said, his voice calm. You're safe here. It's just the fever talking. She looked right through him. You don't understand. He said if I ever took them. Her voice cracked. The letters. I shouldn't have kept them. He'll know where we went. Martha, listen, Ethan said, sitting on the bed. He took her burning hands in his. Nobody is coming. You are all safe here. Promise? She pleaded like a little girl. Promise they can't find us. I promise, he said. And he meant it, though he wasn't sure what he was promising to protect them from. Now lie back down. She let him ease her back onto the pillow, but she clutched his sleeve. Don't let him take my children, please. No one is taking anybody, Ethan said. Sleep now. Her eyes closed, but her grip stayed tight. He hit them, she whispered. Mostly Thomas, 'cause he cried. Martha, sleep, Ethan said gently but firmly. We can talk when you're better. Her hand finally relaxed as she drifted off. Ethan's mind was racing. It all made sense now, the children flinching at loud noises, Martha's constant fear of messing up. Her husband hadn't just died in an accident. When he came out of the room, 3 pairs of worried eyes were on him. He knelt down. Your mama is going to be fine. The fever is just making her confused. She said someone's coming, Sarah stated, her voice flat. She's right, isn't she? Ethan looked at the girl, who seemed far too old for her years. Is there someone who might be looking for y'all? Sarah glanced at her brother and sister before looking back at him. Mama said we don't talk about it. She said bad things happen if we do. Sarah, I need to know if you've brought danger to my home. The little girl's face was a battlefield of worry. You could see she wanted to mind her mother, but she was scared. Her voice came out as a tiny whisper. Our papa, he had a brother, Uncle James. After Papa died, he said we had to come live with him. Mama told him no, that we were leaving for good. He got angry and said family had to stick together. He told Mama that if she ran, he would hunt us down. He said blood is blood, and we belonged with him. Sarah's head shook hard. Uncle James was just like Papa, mean when he had a drink. Mama heard him threatening to teach her some respect. The night we packed to leave, a rock with a note came through our window. It said, "You can't hide from family." A chill went through Ethan that had nothing to do with the cold. Does this uncle know where your aunt in Montana lives? I don't know. Maybe. Are we in trouble now? Did we bring it to you? No, Ethan said, his voice solid as oak. You didn't bring trouble here. It was already on your trail. But you're safe now. I won't let him take you anywhere you don't want to be. You understand me? How? Clara's small voice cut in. Uncle James is big and mean, bigger than you. I don't have to be bigger, Ethan said, standing tall. I just have to be right here, on my land, protecting the folks under my roof. This is my ranch. That makes y'all my responsibility, and I sure as heck take care of what's mine. The children stared at him, a mix of hope and fear in their eyes. Thomas, who'd been silent, suddenly let go of his sisters and wrapped his small arms tight around Ethan's leg. Don't let the bad man get us, he mumbled. Something deep inside Ethan's chest, long asleep, woke up and roared. He scooped the boy up, feeling how light he was, and looked at the girls. I won't. That's a promise. Sleep didn't come easy for Ethan that night. He lay there, listening to the old house settle, thinking about a woman who crossed the country with 3 little ones to escape a man's twisted idea of family. He thought about those kids, who learned to be quiet so they wouldn't stir up the very people meant to protect them. Around midnight, he heard a floorboard creak. Downstairs, he found Sarah in the kitchen, peeking in on her mother. Couldn't sleep? He asked softly. She jumped, then shook her head. Just making sure Mama was still breathing. She is, Ethan said. I already checked. Since we're both up, how about some warm milk? We don't have any. We do. Got 2 cows in the barn I've been too lazy to milk. But I know how. He got the milk from the pantry and warmed it with a little honey he'd been saving. Sarah watched him with those serious eyes. You really won't let him take us? I really won't. You're not even our family. Ethan set 2 warm cups on the table. Sarah, family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's the folks who show up when you're in a tight spot. Your mama chose to come here and I chose to let you stay. That makes us something. Sarah held the warm cup in her small hands. At our old home, Papa always said blood was everything, that you did what you were told or else. Sounds to me like your papa was wrong about a whole lot of things. Are you married, Mr. Cole? The question caught him by surprise. I was. A long time ago. What happened to her? She passed on. A fever, like your mama's got, but it took her. This was before I came to Wyoming. Her name was Elizabeth. We were married 2 years. Did you love her? I did. And you still do? Ethan thought about her face. More a ghost of a memory now. I'll always care for who she was, he said. But the sharp part of the hurt, it fades. Time has a way of making even the biggest pain smaller. How long does it take? Depends on the person and the pain. But it happens. Sarah sipped her milk. Mama cried when Papa died, but not like she was sad. It was more like she was scared and relieved all at once. Does that make her a bad person? No, Ethan said firmly. It makes her honest. Not every death is a tragedy, Sarah. Sometimes an ending is just a mercy that was long overdue. She nodded slowly, taking it all in. They sat in a comfortable quiet until their cups were empty. He sent her back to bed, telling her to wake him if her mother's condition changed. He stayed by the fire, thinking about the family sleeping upstairs. 3 kids who knew fear better than safety. A woman who chose a desperate run over staying put. And somewhere out there, a man who believed blood gave him the right to own people. Let him come, Ethan thought. Let him just try. Hollow Ridge was a long way from anywhere, and easy enough to defend. He'd learned a long time ago that some fights weren't about winning. They were about making the price of admission higher than anyone was willing to pay. He woke to a world buried in white. Heavy snow had fallen all night, turning the ranch into a postcard. It was beautiful, but it was the kind of snow that could trap a man for weeks. He dressed and went downstairs. Sarah was already there, standing guard by her mother's door. How is she? The fever broke an hour ago, she said, her voice filled with relief. She's sleeping peaceful now. A weight lifted off Ethan's shoulders. That's good news. Real good. He stoked the fire back to life. Did you get any sleep? A little. Clara wet the bed. She hasn't done that since we left Ohio. I think she's more scared than she lets on. Ain't no shame in being scared, Ethan said, getting the coffee started. Where's Clara now? Back asleep with Thomas. They're both worn out. Sarah went to the window and looked out at the deep drifts. That's a lot of snow, 2 feet, I reckon. Maybe more. We're snowed in. Ethan joined her. It's a good thing your mama got here when she did. Another day or two and this road would have been gone. After a moment, she asked, You think Uncle James knows where we are? I can't say. But even if he does, he can't get through this. Nobody can. We've got time. Mama says running away is for cowards, that good people face their problems. Your mama's wrong about that, Ethan said, his voice gentle but sure. Sometimes getting out is the bravest thing a person can do, especially when staying means letting someone hurt you or your kids. That ain't cowardice, that's survival. But he'll say we're his blood, that we owe him. Blood doesn't give a man the right to hurt you, Sarah, and loyalty has to be earned. It isn't something you can just demand. Ethan turned to look her square in the eye. I need you to listen. Whatever your mama told you about shame or running, she was just trying to protect you. But y'all don't owe that man a single thing, not you, not your brother, and not your mama. You understand? Sarah looked at his face for a long time, then gave a small nod. I'll try. That's all anyone can ask. By mid-morning, Martha was finally awake and clear-headed. Ethan heard her talking quietly with Sarah and gave them their space. Soon, Sarah stood in the kitchen doorway. Mama wants to see you. He found Martha propped up with pillows. She looked worn out with dark circles under her eyes, but her gaze was steady. I'm sorry, she said right away, for being a burden. Stop that, Ethan said, pulling a chair to the bed. You had a fever. It happens. Nobody's keeping score. Martha twisted the blanket in her hands. Sarah said I was talking about things I shouldn't have. You were delirious. People say all kinds of things. But you heard, didn't you? She asked, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and defiance. About my husband. About why we really left. Ethan took a moment before he spoke. I know your husband's brother is looking for you, that he wants to take the children. Martha's face lost all its color. She never should have told you. I told them never to speak of him. Sarah told me because she was scared for you and because I asked, Ethan said calmly. Martha, if someone might come looking for you, I have to know. This is my home. I have a right to know what trouble might be on its way. Then send us away, she said flatly. We'll leave as soon as the snow clears. I won't bring trouble to you. I'm not sending you anywhere, he said. I'm asking you to trust me with the truth. She looked away, her jaw tight. Finally, she began to speak, her voice low. My husband's name was Daniel. I married him when I was 17. He seemed like a good man from a good family. She paused. But he wasn't. He was charming at first, but after we were married, he changed. He started with small things, criticizing my cooking or the house. Then it got worse. He had a terrible temper. He'd break things. Then he started hitting me. Ethan's hands clenched into fists. He forced them to relax. I thought about leaving, but I had nowhere to go. And then the children came, Sarah, then Clara, then Thomas. Each time it just got harder to leave. Her voice held steady, but her hands told a different story. I kept telling myself it wasn't so bad, that he'd stop if I just tried a little harder. But he never did. He just got smarter about where the bruises were left. The children learned to be quiet, to make themselves small when he was drinking. Sarah got real good at reading his moods. 4 months ago, he fell 3 stories onto concrete at the mill. The foreman said it was a tragic accident, but I knew better. Daniel was always drinking, and it was bound to catch up to him. Then his brother James showed up. James was a different kind of mean. Daniel hit when he was angry. James just seemed to enjoy it. He came to the house talking about how he had rights to us now. He said I was too weak to raise the children on my own. He didn't want to marry me. He wanted to own me. When I told him no, he started making threats. A rock came through our window one night with a note tied to it. It said I couldn't hide from family. So I ran. I took what little money we had, packed a few things, and we disappeared in the middle of the night. My aunt out in Montana said there was work, and I figured if we could just get there, we would be safe. I never told her about James. I was too ashamed that I'd stayed with Daniel for so long, that I let my children see that life. We just wanted a clean start. Then the winter came on fast, and I saw your notice for help. I thought maybe we'd found a safe place to rest. But now I've brought all this trouble right to your door. James is a persistent man. If he found us this far, he will not stop. Ethan's voice was like stone. Let him come. This is my land, and you are under my protection. That still means something out here. You don't get it. James doesn't care about the law. He just takes what he wants. Ethan leaned in. Then he is about to learn that some folks hurt back. Why would you risk so much for complete strangers? Ethan thought about the deep silence in his house after Elizabeth died. He thought about choosing to be alone because it felt safer than connecting with anyone. Then he looked at this woman and her 3 scared children. Because nobody should have to face the world all alone, he said. And those children deserve better than a life of running and hiding. If I can give them a safe place, even just for one winter, then that is something that matters. Tears welled up in Martha's eyes. I do not know how I can ever repay you for this. You already are. You are cooking and caring for your family. That is more than enough. Now you get some rest. We will worry about James if he shows his face, and if he does, we will handle it together. Then Ethan paused at the door. One more thing. What you did to protect your children took more courage than most people will ever know. Do not let them think it was shameful. He found the girls in the kitchen, their eyes wide with worry. Your mama's going to be just fine, he told them. Sarah, I reckon you can make some soup. There are vegetables in the cellar. Outside, the snow was falling thick and fast, muffling the whole world in a strange quiet. In the barn, the animals were restless. He moved between them, checking their food and water, his low voice calming them down. The simple, honest work helped him think. He had spent 3 years avoiding this exact kind of trouble. Now, here he was, planning to defend a family he'd only known for 2 weeks. He should have felt trapped. But instead, he felt a sense of purpose he had not felt in a long, long time. The storm raged for 3 whole days. The world became the warm circle of light inside the ranch house. A new rhythm started during those days. From her bed, Martha gently guided the children with chores. Sarah had a natural touch in the kitchen. Even little Thomas had his own jobs, like keeping the wood box full. Ethan found himself inside more than usual. He would sit by the fire, carving little wooden animals for the children or reading adventure stories aloud. He had not seen the girls smile like that before. On the 3rd evening, The storm finally broke. Martha came out of her room, still pale but steady. She stood in the doorway, watching Ethan read to the children by the lamplight. "Thank you," she said in a quiet voice, "for keeping them safe." "They are good kids," he answered, looking up from his book. "They seem to like you." Martha moved to a chair. "That is not a small thing. They do not trust people easily." "I cannot imagine why," he said, his tone dry. "Sarah told me what you said about running not being a cowardly thing to do. I meant every word of it. I know." Martha watched her children for a moment. "I always told them to be strong, to endure it. I thought I was teaching them to be resilient. Maybe I was just teaching them how to suffer." "You did the best you could," Ethan said, closing his book. "That is all any of us can do." That night, after the children were asleep, they sat at the kitchen table. "What will you do when spring comes?" he asked her. Martha looked down into her coffee cup. "I do not know. The wagon is just about done for. I cannot stay here forever. You hired me for the winter. When the snow is gone, you will want your place back to yourself." "Maybe," Ethan said. "Maybe some quiet ain't so bad. Or maybe I will find I like having folks around, making this place feel like a home again. You are offering my family a roof over our heads. All I am saying is we do not need to decide our whole future while we are still stuck deep in winter." He looked her square in the eye. "One season at a time, Martha. That is all anyone can handle." She gave a slow nod, a wave of relief washing over her face. One season at a time. A comfortable quiet settled between them then. Two souls who had found a bit of unexpected comfort in each other. It was not friendship, not yet, but it was the firm ground where it could grow. That morning broke clear and cold enough to crack a stone. Ethan was up before the sun, shoveling paths in the snow to the barn and the woodpile. The work felt good, felt honest. He was hauling a load of firewood back to the house when he saw them. Tracks, coming right out of the woods straight for his barn, not from some animal. These were boot prints. Somebody had been prowling around his property in the dead of night. A chill, colder than the wind, shot through Ethan. He dropped the wood and followed the trail. The tracks circled his barn, then crept toward the house from different sides before heading back toward the road. Someone was casing the joint, looking for a way in. The wind had blown snow in them, but you could still see them plain as day. Whoever it was had been moving in the thick of a killer storm. That meant they were determined. Ethan followed the tracks to the edge of the woods, where they vanished into the deep snow. He stood there a good long while, feeling a set of eyes on him from the trees. When he got back to the house, Martha saw his face and all the color drained from hers. "What is wrong?" "Somebody was out here last night, just looking around." "It is him." Martha's voice was flat, certain. "It is James. He found us. You cannot know that for sure." "I know." She stared out the window at the endless white. "I know because I have been waiting for this. Men like James do not let go of what they figure belongs to them." Ethan saw the fear she was trying to wrestle down. "Even if it is him, he cannot get through all this snow, not on my land." "The law does not mean a thing to him," Martha said, turning from the window. "You have to send us away before he comes back and somebody gets hurt." "No," Ethan said, "no. We are not making choices out of fear. Somebody was here, yes, but we do not know who or why. And even if it is this James, it does not change a thing. You are staying. The children are staying. If he shows his face, we will deal with him then. You do not understand what that man can do." "Then make me understand," Ethan said, stepping closer. "Because right now, all I see is a woman so used to running, she cannot imagine that planting your feet might be the better play." Martha just stared, a war of anger and fear in her eyes. "You think I am a coward? I think you are scared to death. There is a difference." His voice got softer. "But you are not by yourself anymore, Martha. That changes things. Does it? Or does it just mean more people get hurt? That is my risk to take. This is my home, my choice. I will not let him run you off my land, not without a fight." And if fighting him gets me killed, well, at least I will go down for something that matters. The words felt raw coming out. For 3 years I have been hiding up here, Martha. Hiding from grief, from people, from anything that might hurt. You think I do not know about running? I have been running since the day my Elizabeth died. Just I have been doing it standing still. Martha looked stunned, the fear in her eyes giving way to surprise. That is different. You lost somebody you loved. And you lost years of your life to a man who hurt you. You lost your home and your safety. Do not tell me that is not a grief worth running from. He took a steadying breath. At some point, running stops being about getting away and starts being all you know how to do. I am done running. The question is, are you? The only sound in the kitchen was the crackle of the fire. They could hear the children starting to stir, the normal sounds of a new day. Finally, Martha whispered, I do not know how to stop. Neither do I, he said, but maybe we can figure it out together. She nodded, tears rolling down her face. If James comes and you get hurt, I will never forgive myself. Then we will just have to make sure that does not happen. Ethan moved to the door. I'm going to take a harder look at those tracks. You keep the children inside today. Do you understand me? Yes. And Martha, load that rifle behind the door. Her eyes went wide. I do not know how to shoot a gun. Sarah probably does. Her daddy likely taught his oldest. He pulled his coat on. Ask her. And if anyone you do not know comes to this house, you do not open that door. You hear? Martha nodded, fear still in her eyes, but a little steel behind it now. Be careful. Always am. Ethan spent a couple of hours tracking, reading the story left in the snow. The man was tall, with a long stride, and heavy. He came from the east, up the valley road, right through the storm. That took a special kind of mean. The tracks eventually went northeast, toward the pass. Ethan stood in the quiet of the woods and listened. He heard nothing but the wind, but that feeling of being watched never left him. When he returned, he found Sarah showing her mother how to load and aim the old Winchester. The little girl moved with a confidence that made Ethan's gut twist. He was angry at a man who would teach a 9-year-old about guns, but not how to feel safe. Good, he said, making them both jump. Keep it handy. I do not reckon anyone is coming today, but it is better to be ready. The day crawled by. Ethan stayed close to the house, always in sight. The children played quietly, picking up on the worry. Martha moved like a machine, her eyes always darting to the windows, to the doors, to the rifle leaning against the wall. Evening came with no trouble. Ethan walked the property one last time as the sun went down, looking for fresh tracks. He found nothing, but it did not calm his nerves. Just because you cannot see a snake does not mean it is not in the grass. That night, he did not go up to his cold bedroom. He laid a bedroll by the stove where he could see both doors. Martha saw him and just nodded. Before she closed her door, she looked back at him. Thank you, she said, her voice soft, for not running either. Then she was gone. The house grew quiet. Ethan sat in the dark, the Winchester resting across his lap, and he listened. Let James come. Let him try to take what was not his. This house had people in it now. And Ethan Cole, after 3 years of hiding from his own life, found he was more than ready to fight for this one. The stranger showed up 3 days later, around noon, when the sun was high in the sky. The warmth of the sun on the snow was a lie. Ethan was out back splitting logs when he heard it. The slow, heavy crunch of a horse walking up the snow-covered track to his home. He put the axe down and slipped into the shadows of the barn to get a better look. A big man on a big horse, moving like he owned the whole dang mountain. Something about him set Ethan's teeth on edge. He circled back to the house, his face grim. Martha saw him, and her own face went pale. He's here. Someone's out there. You stay inside with the children, and you lock this door behind me. Ethan, wait. Lock the door, Martha. He grabbed the old Winchester from its spot by the door, checked it, and gave her a hard look. I mean it. No matter what you hear, you keep them babies safe and this door bolted. She nodded, herding her kids away from the windows. Ethan stepped out onto the porch, pulling the door shut. He heard the lock slide home just as the rider stopped his horse in the yard about 20 feet out. The man was a giant, with a mean set to his jaw. His cold blue eyes scanned the property like he was tallying up what he could take. "Can I help you?" Ethan's voice was steady, the rifle held loose at his side. "I'm looking for my family." The man's voice was smooth, like a snake oil salesman. "My brother's widow, Martha Hale, and her 3 children. Have you seen them?" "Can't say that I have." Ethan stood his ground on the porch. "This here is private land. You need to state your business or ride on out." The man offered a smile that was all teeth. "Private land, you say? Funny, because I know for a fact my sister-in-law came this way. And there ain't many places a body can hide up here. Then I reckon she kept on going. Maybe." The man's eyes locked onto Ethan. Or maybe a kind soul took her in, not knowing she was running from her family obligations. Family obligations? Ethan let that hang in the freezing air. "Is that what you're calling it?" A flicker of anger crossed the man's face. "I call it taking care of my own blood. My brother passed. As his kin, it's my duty to see to his widow and children. And if she don't want your care, she's grieving. She's confused. I'm just trying to bring my family home where they belong." He swung down from his horse. "Now I'm going to ask you one last time, real neighborly. Have you seen Martha Hale and her children?" Ethan brought the Winchester up just a bit. A clear warning. "And I'm going to tell you one last time, this is my place. The only folks here are the ones I invite. And I don't remember sending you an invitation." The man's smile turned nasty. "You're making a big mistake, friend. This is family business. No need for you to get tangled up in it. I got tangled the second your horse stepped on my land. Is that so?" The man took another step, testing him. "Do you even know who I am?" "Don't know, don't care. James Hale, Martha's husband's brother." He took another step. "The one with legal rights to those children, the one who can make a whole world of trouble for a man hiding them." "Legal rights?" Ethan's voice went cold as ice. "Last I heard, a man's brother don't get his kids just because he passed. Not when their mother is alive and well. A woman alone can't raise children right. They need a man's discipline. A judge will see it my way, especially after I explain how she ran off, putting those children in danger. You can say whatever you want. Doesn't make it the gospel truth. Truth is whatever folks believe, and I believe my sister-in-law is scared. I believe she ran off without thinking. And I believe the man hiding her has no idea the trouble he's in for. Let me tell you what kind of trouble you're in." Ethan's voice was low but clear. "You're on my land making threats against folks I've never even heard of. So you can turn that horse around and ride away, or you can push your luck and find out how much your legal rights matter out here." James stared at him for a long, hard second. Then he let out a harsh laugh. "You're either real brave or real stupid. Don't matter to me what you think, so long as you're leaving." "Oh, I'll leave, for now." James walked back to his horse slow and easy. "But this ain't over. I always get what's mine." He swung into the saddle, then looked back at the house, his eyes lingering on the windows. "You tell Martha I'll be back. You tell her family always finds family. I can wait for the snow to melt. But when spring comes, we'll see how tough her new friend is. I'll tell her you trespassed and you ain't welcome back." James's eyes went hard as stone. "You just made an enemy you don't want, friend. Better you than a man who lets a bully walk all over women and children." For a second, it looked like James might just charge. But then he tipped his hat in a mocking gesture and turned his horse. "See you in the spring." Then he rode off, slow and deliberate. Ethan watched him until he was gone, then waited 5 minutes more just to be sure. The door creaked open behind him. Martha stood there holding a rifle, her face a mask of pure terror. Was that him? That was him. Ethan stepped inside and bolted the door. The children were huddled by the fire, their eyes wide with fear. "What did he say?" "He said he knows you're here. Said he'll be back in the spring to collect what he's owed." Ethan set his rifle down and faced her. "He thinks those kids are his property." "He'll come back." She said it like a death sentence. "When the thaw comes, he'll be back. and he'll bring the law with him or worse. Let him try. Ethan, you don't get it. James always wins. We can't fight him. Then we have to be ready for him. But how? Winter will end, and we'll be right back where we started. Trapped. Ethan looked at her, at the fear in her eyes. He looked at the children hiding in the shadows. Or when spring gets here, we make sure you ain't the helpless widow he thinks you are. What are you talking about? I'm talking about using this winter to get ready. I'm talking about making sure that when James comes back, his legal claim ain't worth the paper it's written on. I don't understand. Marry me, Martha. Ethan's words dropped into that quiet kitchen like rocks in a still pond. Martha's jaw worked, but no sound came out. The children just stared. He said it again, surer this time. Marry me. He explained, James is fixing to argue you are an unfit mother all alone with 3 little ones. But if you are married to a landowner with a good home, well, his argument just falls to pieces. You would not be alone anymore. Martha finally shook her head. You cannot be serious. I am dead serious, Ethan said, his voice earnest. Look, I know this is not some romance story. This is about keeping you all safe. It gives you legal protection. It makes these children mine in the eyes of the law, which means James cannot touch them. It is a whole lot harder to claim a married woman is unstable than a widow on the run. Martha whispered, You do not even know me. I know you're a good mother, he said softly. I know you are brave. And in the few weeks you have been here, this place has felt more like a home than it has since my Elizabeth passed. What do you get out of this mess besides my trouble with James and 3 children that are not yours? He met her eyes. I get to not be alone anymore, he said. And I get to stand up to a bully who thinks he has rights over folks just because of blood. Martha looked over at her children. Sarah, watching with eyes too smart for her age. Clara, with a flicker of hope. Thomas, with the simple trust of a little boy. I will not trap you in this, she said. I am not sacrificing a thing, he insisted. This is a choice, a practical choice that helps everybody. Think of it as a partnership. You run the house, I run the ranch. We face James together, as a team. Then he looked right at the children. Y'all should have a say. Your mama and I are talking about getting married. Not a love story marriage, but one to keep you safe from that man. Sarah spoke first, her voice small but firm. Would we get to stay here, even after the snow melts? If you wanted to, yes, Ethan answered. And the bad man, Uncle James, he could not make us go. He would have a much harder time of it. I would be your legal stepfather. That would give me the right to protect you, Clara piped up next. Would you be our papa? Ethan's chest felt tight. I would be your stepfather. That is a little different. I would just be someone else who cares about you all, if you would let me. Then Thomas, who hardly ever spoke, stunned them all. Will you be mean like Papa was? The question just hung there in the air, heavy with fear. Ethan knelt down to the boy's level. No, Thomas. I promise you that. I might get frustrated sometimes, and I'm not always patient, but I will never, ever lay a hand on you, or your sisters, or your mama. That is a promise I will keep, as long as I live. The little boy looked deep into his eyes, then gave a slow nod. Okay. Clara looked at her mother. Mama, can we stay? Please? Tears slipped down Martha's cheeks. This is a big thing Mr. Cole is offering. I need to think. Sarah's voice was sharp. What is there to think about? We stay. We are safe. We leave. Uncle James finds us. Seems simple to me. When Martha started to object, Sarah looked at Ethan. You would really marry Mama just to help us? I really mean it, he said. Sarah blushed a little. And you would not expect things a husband usually expects? Ethan understood her grown-up question. This would be a marriage in name and law only. Your mama would have her room. I would have mine. Nothing would change except you all would be safe. I give you my word." Sarah turned back to her mother. "Then I think we should say yes. You are 9 years old. You cannot make this choice." "But you can," Sarah's voice cracked. "And you will say no because you think we are not worth the trouble. But we are worth it, Mama. You are worth it. If Mr. Cole is offering help, maybe we should just take it." Martha stared at her daughter, then looked straight at Ethan. "Why are you really doing this? Tell me the truth." He thought for a second. "Because I am tired of being half alive. Because you and your children reminded me what it feels like to be needed. And because when James threatened folks under my protection, something in me that has been asleep for 3 years woke right up. Something that says some things are worth fighting for. We would just be another burden. Or you would be a reason to get up in the morning that is bigger than just making it through another day." He promised, "If you say yes, you will never have to face James alone again. You will never have to run. And these children will have a safe home for as long as they need one." Martha looked at her children's hopeful faces, at the warm kitchen, and then at this quiet man who had offered them everything. "If we do this," she said slowly, "it has to be legal and proper, with a preacher." "Agreed," he said. "And you will not expect me to be a wife in all the ways." "I expect you to be yourself," Ethan said gently. "We will figure out the rest as we go." She was quiet for a long time. Finally, she gave one sharp nod. "All right, I will marry you, for the children's sake. But I already respect you. I already care what happens to you and your children. Maybe that's a good enough place to start." Martha wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and asked, "When?" "Soon as we can manage. Once this storm lets up and the roads are clear enough to get to town. I can fetch the preacher, or we can go to him. Either way, it needs to be done before spring, before James shows his face again." Sarah stepped right up, her serious eyes looking from one to the other. "Thank you, Mr. Cole. Thank you for giving us a chance. You can call me Ethan." The little girl thought on it for a moment, then gave a firm nod. "Ethan, then." Clara and Thomas moved in closer, and suddenly Ethan was surrounded by 3 small children. They smelled of soap, and a hope he had not known in a long time. Martha watched from across the room. "I will hold you to your promises," she said, her voice low. "The promise not to hit, to keep us safe, to be a better man than the ones I have known." "Good," he said. "You hold me to them. And if I ever break my word, you take that rifle and you run." A faint smile touched Martha's lips. "Deal." That night, they sat at the kitchen table and worked out the details like a business deal. They talked money, property, and how to run the household. It was all very formal, like 2 folks signing a contract instead of planning a life. But right in the middle of talking about crop rotations, Martha's hand found his on the table. She said nothing. Her fingers just rested on his for a second. It was a silent promise of trust. Then she pulled her hand back, stood up, and went to her room. That one small touch spoke volumes. It said she was willing to take this chance. It said she believed him. It said that maybe, just maybe, they could build something real out of this strange arrangement. Ethan sat there in the dark for a long while after she left. He listened to the quiet sounds of the house. 5 people under one roof. They were tied together now by a choice, a promise, and the will to stand against what was coming. James would be back in the spring, that was a certainty. But he would not find a scared widow and her helpless children. He would find a family. It was an odd family, born from need, but it was a family just the same. And they had a whole winter to grow strong. The stars outside were sharp and bright in the cold sky. Inside, the fire burned with a steady warmth. For the first time since Elizabeth died, Ethan Cole felt like he was building a future, instead of just running from his past. It was not love, not yet. It might never be. But it was something solid, something real and worth defending. Sometimes that is more than enough. The wedding was on a Tuesday in late January. The sun was out, melting a little ice, but the snow was still deep. Ethan had ridden to Hollow Ridge the week before. The snowdrifts were sometimes as high as his horse's chest. He went to get Reverend Michaels and the right papers. The Reverend was a practical man. He had spent 20 years marrying miners and ranchers and did not ask a lot of questions. When Ethan explained the situation, a widow with 3 kids needing protection, a marriage just for show, Michaels just nodded. He said he had seen stranger deals work out better than true love matches. The Lord works in mysterious ways, he had said, packing his Bible. Sometimes practical protection is its own kind of blessing. So there they stood, in the kitchen that had become the center of their new life. Sarah, Clara, and Thomas were the witnesses. The Reverend's voice filled the small room with words of commitment, until death do us part. Martha wore her best faded blue dress. Ethan had shaved and put on his good shirt, the one without patches. It was simple, but it was honest. Do you, Ethan Cole, take Martha Hale to be your lawfully wedded wife? Ethan looked at Martha's serious face. Her eyes were full of unasked questions. He thought about how crazy this all was, and how it also made perfect sense. I do. And do you, Martha Hale, take Ethan Cole to be your lawfully wedded husband? Martha's voice was quiet, but it was strong. I do. Then, by the power vested in me by the territory of Wyoming, I pronounce you man and wife. The Reverend shut his Bible. You can kiss your bride now. They looked at each other, both unsure. Then Martha stepped forward, stood on her toes, and gave him a quick kiss on the cheek. Thank you, she whispered, so low that only he could hear, for this chance. Thank me by making sure I do not regret it, he replied. The children clapped. The Reverend poured a little whiskey for the grown-ups and some cider for the kids. They toasted to new beginnings. After the Reverend was paid and gone, the new family stood in the kitchen. The silence was awkward. They were a family in the eyes of the law, but nothing felt different. Well, Martha finally said, I suppose I should start dinner. Being married does not mean we do not have to eat. I will help, Clara said right away. Me too, Thomas added. The kitchen soon filled with the normal sounds of making a meal, and the strangeness of the day started to fade. Ethan watched them. He saw Martha's sure movements and Clara's focus. He saw little Thomas trying to help, mostly getting in the way. He felt a quiet contentment settle in his chest. Sarah came and stood by him at the window. Are you scared? She asked softly. About Uncle James coming back. A little, Ethan admitted. But mostly I am just set on what needs to be done. There is a difference. What if he brings the law with him? What if he has papers saying he has a right to us? Then we will show them our papers. We will show them you have a home, a mother, and now a stepfather to provide for you. We will show them you are safe and cared for. He looked down at her. The law is supposed to protect children, Sarah. If James comes with papers, we will fight him with papers of our own. That is what families do. They figure out problems together. Sarah looked at him for a long time, then nodded. I'm glad Mama married you, even if it is just pretend. It is not pretend, it is just different. Ethan put a hand on her shoulder. And I am glad, too. You are good kids. You are worth protecting. Tears welled up in the little girl's eyes. Our papa never said things like that. Then your papa was a fool. That night, they ate dinner as a real family for the first time. The talk was careful as everyone tried to figure out this new life. Later, after the children were asleep, Martha knocked on Ethan's door. He had moved his things back upstairs. Now she stood in his doorway, looking unsure. Can we talk? Of course, he said, pointing to a chair. I wanted to be sure we are clear on the rules, now that it is official. Martha sat down. You said this was just in name. I need to know you meant that. I need to know you will not change your mind now that the papers are signed. Martha, you do not belong to me. That is not what this is about. Ethan leaned against the dresser. This marriage gives you legal protection. It gives me the right to defend you and the children. That is all. Your room is still your room. Your choices are still your choices. Nothing has changed except what we show to the outside world. What happens in this house is our business, not theirs. He moved to a nearby chair. For what it is worth, if I had to choose someone to face down a hard winter and a whole mess of trouble with, I would choose someone just like you. Practical, brave, and you make mighty fine coffee. That almost made her smile. You have low standards if good coffee ranks that high. You have clearly never had my coffee, he joked. Then she got serious. When spring comes, James will come back. It is going to get ugly. He will not just accept this. Then we will fight harder. I meant what I said, Martha. Those children are under my protection now. James will have to go through me to get to them, and I promise you I will not make that easy. You could get hurt. He is a dangerous man. Ethan's voice was low and steady. So am I. He just does not know it yet. We have to be ready for him. We'll be waiting when he shows up. She paused at the door on her way out. Ethan, I need to thank you for being a good man we can trust, not someone who would take advantage. And thank you for letting me be a part of something more than just trying to get by. When she was gone, Ethan sat alone in the quiet room. He thought about the day and the family he had somehow gathered around him. He thought about the danger waiting out there in the snow. He should have felt cornered. Instead, he felt like he had a purpose again, a feeling he had not known since Elizabeth passed. The weeks that followed found a new rhythm. Martha and Ethan learned to work together in the house, figuring out the small things that come with a legal partnership. The children started to relax. Their laughter came more often, and they moved with more confidence. Sarah began helping Ethan with the heavy work, showing a surprising strength. Clara followed Martha in the kitchen, learning every recipe with a serious focus. And little Thomas simply soaked in the peace, his bad dreams finally starting to fade. February came with a bitter cold under clear skies. The snow was deep on the ground, a frozen world of white and gray. Ethan used the quiet time to teach the children what they needed to know. He taught them how to read the weather, how to care for the animals, and how to shoot a rifle straight, just in case. Why do we have to learn this? Clara asked one day as she learned to load the Winchester. Because knowing things keeps you safe, Ethan told her. The more you can do for yourself, the less you have to rely on anyone else. If something happens, if I am not here, you need to be able to take care of things. Is something bad going to happen? I sure hope not. But hoping is not a plan. We plan for the worst and hope for the best. Martha watched it all with a mix of pride and fear. She was proud her children were learning, but scared they had to. She trusted Ethan knew what was necessary, so she never said a word against it. One evening late in February, they sat by the fire after the children were in bed. Martha finally asked what was on her mind. What if we are wrong? What if James does not come back? Do you really believe that? Ethan asked her. She was quiet for a long moment. No, James never gives up. Us getting married probably just made him more determined. It made this whole thing personal to him. Then we keep getting ready. Better to be prepared for nothing than caught by surprise. And what about after? After we handle James, what happens then? Do we just keep on like this? Married, but not really. A family made from need instead of love. Ethan thought about her question for a good while. I do not know. Maybe we figure that out as we go along. Or maybe we just stay partners, watching out for each other. Does that really matter right now? I suppose it does not. Martha just stared into the fire. I just wonder what holds us together when the fear is gone. We have respect for each other and we share this life. That is more than a lot of folks start with. Is it enough? Ask me again in a year, Ethan said with a small smile. Right now it feels like it just might be. March blew in with fierce storms and more snow, but you could feel a change in the air. The sun felt a little warmer and the nights were not quite as cold. Winter was losing its grip, inch by inch. And as the weather changed, the feeling in the house grew tense. Everyone knew that spring meant the roads would clear. It meant James could finally reach them. Ethan made sure they had enough ammunition. Martha practiced stories with the children, making sure they knew what to say. Sarah practiced with the rifle until she could hit a target with scary accuracy for a 9-year-old girl. The day finally came in the middle of April when the last of the snow had melted from the road. Ethan was in the barn when he heard the sound of several horses. He grabbed the Winchester and moved to a spot where he could see the yard. There were 3 riders this time. James Hale was in the lead, looking bigger and meaner than Ethan remembered. The 2 men with him looked like hired trouble, with hard faces and guns worn out in the open. They rode into the yard like they owned the place. Ethan stepped out from the barn with his rifle held steady. He saw Martha appear in the doorway of the house holding her own rifle. They had planned for this moment, but real life always feels different. "You again," James said, his voice sounding friendly in a fake sort of way. "I told you I would be back." "You did," Ethan replied. "And I told you that you were not welcome here." "Well, things have changed," James said, pointing to his men. "I have witnesses now, and I have legal papers." He pulled a document from inside his coat, signed by a judge. "It gives me custody of my brother's children. It says their mother is unfit." "I have some papers too," Ethan said, his voice calm. "A marriage certificate, and legal adoption papers for all 3 children. They are mine now just as much as they are Martha's. Your blood rights just got a lot more complicated." James's smile vanished. "You married her?" "2 months ago. The Reverend himself was here, and I took my nieces and nephew as my own children." James's voice got low and dangerous. "That was a real stupid move." "Was it? From where I'm standing, it means your little custody paper just started a custody fight. It is the mother and the legal stepfather against the uncle. You want to take a guess how that is going to end? You think a piece of paper is going to stop me?" James got off his horse, and his men did the same. "You think some pretend marriage means anything at all? I think it means you cannot just walk in here and take these children, not without going through the law, and you would have to prove Martha is an unfit mother, which she is not." Ethan raised his rifle just a bit. "And I think it means you need to get off my land before this gets ugly. Those are big words for 1 man against 3. Make that 2. Martha's voice cut through the air. She had moved onto the porch, her own rifle aimed steady. 2 against 3. And there are 3 more guns inside this house if we need them. My children know how to shoot, Mr. Hale. I made sure of it myself." James looked from Ethan to Martha, his anger turning into cold calculation. "You made this a fight the second you threatened my family," Martha said, her voice harder than Ethan had ever heard it. "I ran from your brother Daniel because fighting him was a death sentence. But I am done running. You want these children? You have to go through us. You have to go through the law. You do it the right way, or you do not do it at all." "The law sides with blood," James growled. "The law sides with a safe 2-parent home on a working farm. It does not side with a single man with a violent past." Ethan took a step closer. "That is right, James. We know all about your history. It took some asking around, but folks remember you. They remember the fights and the threats. They remember that woman back in Ohio who pressed charges before you paid her off to keep quiet. You are not the good citizen you pretend to be." James's face turned dark with pure rage. "You looked into my past? I did my homework. You should have done the same before you rode up here." "Now this is what is going to happen," Ethan said, his voice steady. "You and your men are going to get back on your horses and ride away. You are going to take your worthless papers with you, and you are going to leave my family alone. Or what? Or I will file charges for harassment. I will get a restraining order. I will make your life so difficult in the eyes of the law that you will wish you had never heard of us. Look, Daniel was your brother. I get that. But these children do not want you. Their mother does not want you. Pushing this is not going to change their minds. They are my blood. Blood does not give you the right to own people," Martha said, her voice cutting through his protest. I was married to your brother for 10 years. 10 years of walking on eggshells and making excuses for his bruises, children to be invisible just so he wouldn't get angry. I am not putting them through that ever again, not for blood, not for family, not for anything. You are just like Daniel. Meaner, maybe, but the same deep down. You want control, not family. You want to own things, not care for them. Martha's hands were trembling, but her rifle was steady. The answer is no. It has always been no. And it will always be no. Find another way to honor your brother's memory. One of James's men shifted his weight. Boss, maybe we should rethink this. A legal marriage and adoption, well, that changes things. This could get real messy. Another man was already turning to his horse. I signed on for easy money, not a family feud on their own land. I am out of here. As his men deserted him, James turned his fury on Ethan and Martha. This is not over. Yes, it is. Ethan's voice was firm. It's over because you do not really care about those kids. You just care about winning. And you just lost. Accept it and move on. James stared with a hatred you could almost feel. Then, without a word, he got on his horse and rode away. Ethan and Martha stood in the yard long after he was gone, their rifles still ready. The only sounds were the birds starting to sing again, and the livestock settling down. The quiet told them the danger had passed. Finally, Martha lowered her rifle, her hands shaking badly now. Is it really over? I reckon so. Ethan gently took the gun from her. He knows he cannot win a legal fight. And I do not think he cares enough to try anything else. It is too much risk for wounded pride. What if you are wrong? Then we will deal with it. But Martha, you look at me. He waited until her eyes met his. You stood up to him. You did not run, and you did not back down. You claimed your own life. That is everything. Tears streamed down her face, but she was also smiling. I have never done that before. You did it today, and you were magnificent. The front door flew open and 3 children ran out. They had watched the whole thing from the windows. They wrapped their arms around Martha, all talking at once, making sure she was all right. Ethan stepped back to give them their moment, watching the family he had somehow become part of. Sarah looked over at him with a big, genuine smile. We did it. Y'all did it, Ethan corrected her gently. Your mama did it. I just provided a little backup. You gave us more than that, Martha said, stepping beside him. You gave us a safe place to stand. Without you, we would still be running. And without y'all, I would still be hiding. So I guess we are even. They stood together in the morning sun, this makeshift family, and just breathed. James would be angry for a while, but for now they were safe. The weeks that followed brought a real Texas spring. The ranch came alive, and with Martha and the children there, every little thing felt like a miracle. Clara found the first wildflowers. Thomas learned to gather eggs, and Sarah helped Ethan with the planting, asking smart questions about the land. Her laughter started to sound more natural. She was his wife on paper, but they lived in separate rooms with lines you did not cross. Still, the walls between them were getting lower. One evening in May, after the kids were tucked in, they sat on the porch watching the stars pop out. Martha finally broke the silence. I have been thinking about what we are doing here, this life we have built. Ethan felt his gut clench. I think it is more than we bargained for, she continued. Maybe not a marriage like in the storybooks, but it is real all the same. She looked at him through the twilight. You are a good father to them, Ethan. A better one than Daniel ever was. They trust you. I think they even love you. They are good kids, he said. Easy to care for. And what about me, she asked, her voice suddenly fragile. Am I easy to care for? The question hung in the thick night air. Ethan chose his words with care. You are one of the strongest women I have ever known. You are smart and brave, and you have made this place a home. So, yes, you are easy to care about. He paused, looking for the right words. You are easy to build a life with. I did not say you were not easy to love. he said, turning to face her. Martha, I do not know what to call this. It started out as a deal to keep you safe, but it has turned into something else. Maybe it is a deep partnership. Maybe it is love. Does it really need a name? I suppose not, she said softly. I was so sure I would never trust another man. But you have been nothing but decent and patient. You gave us a safe place to land and asked for nothing. I do not know what to do with that. Then do not do anything, he said, reaching for her hand. Just accept it. We have got time now. No one is chasing us. We can figure this out as we go. Her fingers wrapped around his, hesitant but there. What if this is all I can ever give? What if this is all I want? Then this is what we will have. I am not going anywhere, Martha. I am in this for the long haul, for you and for those children. That does not depend on romance. You are a strange man, Ethan Cole. I have heard that before, he said with a smile she could hear in the dark. But I am your strange man now. For better or worse, she whispered back, and this time her smile was genuine. They sat like that for a long while, holding hands under the stars. Two lost souls who had found a home in the most unlikely of ways. Summer arrived in a blaze of heat, bringing with it the kind of work that kept them busy from sunup to sundown. The children blossomed in the sunshine. Sarah took to the ranch work like a natural. Clara had a knack for gardening, and little Thomas grew braver with every day that passed. And in the middle of all that hard work and sharing meals around a full table, Ethan and Martha started to feel like a real husband and wife. It was not a grand romance, but something built to last, founded on trust and respect. Martha still kept to her own room, but the lines blurred. A hand on his shoulder, a shared smile, talks that went late into the night. It was the small things that were building something big. One hot night in August, she showed up at his bedroom door. Her face was not uncertain this time. It was set with purpose. I have been thinking, she said, getting right to the point, about this marriage of ours. All right, he said, putting his book aside. I do not know if I can ever be the kind of wife Daniel expected, the kind the world expects. He broke something in me that is still healing, but I think I would like for us to be more than just partners on paper. I want to see if this could become something real. Ethan stood up and walked over to her. Are you sure, Martha? There is no pressure. What we have is good enough. Maybe for you, but I have been just surviving for so long. You have shown me there is more to life if I am brave enough to reach for it. So, I am reaching. If you will have me, I mean really have me, I will have you any way you are willing to be had, Ethan said softly. But we go at your own pace. Just two people figuring things out together. Together, Martha agreed. I like that. When he kissed her, it was gentle, a question. She did not pull away. Instead, she leaned into it. It was not a kiss of passion, but one of promise, full of hope for what could be. When they parted, Martha was crying softly. I did not think I could let someone that close again. You were brave, he said. We were brave, she corrected with a small smile. Together, autumn felt like a gift, warm and golden. The whole family worked side by side to bring in the harvest. They prepared for the coming winter, not as strangers, but as a real family. Sarah decided she wanted to be a rancher like Ethan. Clara became the family weather forecaster by watching the animals. And little Thomas was no longer afraid of loud noises, following Ethan around like a shadow. As for Martha, she bloomed. The fear that had held her so tight finally let go. She laughed, she sang, she was strong and open all at once. Her scars were there, but they were healing. They never had a traditional marriage in that one physical sense. Their closeness was found in simpler things. They worked together, sat in comfortable silence, and raised 3 children who needed them both. They built a life that mattered. When the first snow fell, a year after she and the children arrived, they all stood on the porch and watched. Certainty. Last year we were strangers. This year we are a family. That makes all the difference. Even if Uncle James comes back, Martha added, her voice strong. And if he does, we will face him just like we did before. Together. Pa? Thomas said, tugging on Ethan's hand. Will you read us the story about the bear again tonight? The word pa, used so easily for the first time, hit Ethan right in the heart. He looked over at Martha and saw she had tears in her eyes, too. Yeah, buddy, he said, his voice thick. I will read you the stories, just like every other night. Good, Thomas said, leaning against his leg with complete trust. I like when you read. Your voice makes the scary parts not so scary. They all went inside as the snow came down harder, closing the door against the cold. They gathered around the stove, a familiar scene. Ethan read, the children listened, and Martha mended a shirt by the light of the lamp. It was not the life he had ever planned for himself, but it was better. It was messy and real, and full of a love he never knew existed. Winter had brought him a family, and in giving them shelter, he had found his own home. Another winter, Sarah said. You think it will be as hard as the last one? No, Ethan answered, looking at Martha. Not even close. Inside, they sat by the fire, and Ethan read a story to the children. He looked around the room at this family he had found. A family built on choice and trust, not blood. The snow could fall, but in here they were safe. They were all broken in their own ways, but together they had built something whole. It was not perfect or traditional, but it was real and solid. As he read about heroes and courage, Ethan knew with all his heart that he would never be truly alone again. Not with Martha by his side, and not with 3 children who called this place home. Winter would come and go, but this family, their family, would last. And that was more than enough. It was everything. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.